interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Me. Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So, today's episodes that we're going to be reviewing are actually called The Courage Meets the Mummy and Invisible Muriel. So, without further ado, let's just get into these reviews. Okay, so this episode, Courage Meets the Mummy, actually suggests that, this has been a popular theory, but this episode kind of suggests that Muriel and Eustace had past lives, and that one person from their past lives is actually coming to seek revenge. So, this episode this episode starts off with Professor Frith, if you guys remember him. He's the archaeologist guy who came to the house during King Ramses' curse. But in any case, he's digging away in an ancient pyramid, and in the process, he accidentally sets off a Rube Goldberg machine that winds up. He initially doesn't know what the machine actually, the Rube Goldberg machine actually does, but eventually it wakes up the mummy who attacks him. Meanwhile, back at the house, Muriel is actually baking cookies, and Courage is actually helping with the laundry. While Eustace is actually watching a documentary from Professor Frith himself about the ruins that he was actually excavating. And while Eustace is actually watching and kind of complaining about how it seems like a bunch of hooey, he then yells at Courage to actually fold his sheet nice. Which is a big red polka dotted sheet, but he folds up the sheet. But as Courage is actually folding up the sheet, there's actually a knock on the door, and Courage is demanded by Eustace to actually go and open the door. So Courage does, while slowly being told to actually fold the sheet. So Courage winds up getting a little bit exasperated with Eustace in the scene, and it's kind of funny. But he does successfully fold up the sheets and opens the door, only to discover a very badly beaten up Professor Frith. At the front door of the house. At which point they invite him in and greet him, saying that it's nice to see him again. At which point Muriel wonders what exactly happened to him, and the man merely responds that there's actually a mummy running loose and that has risen, and that they're actually in grave danger. And then he proceeds to tell a story about an ancient Mayan princess and her trusted poobah and the royal baker. So the story is that the Mayan princess would always be brought cookies by her royal poobah directly from the baker. But unknown to either of them, the poobah would actually sell some of the cookies off to actually line his own pockets. And eventually the royal baker actually found out that the poobah was actually stealing from the Mayan princess, and threatened to actually tell the princess before he could find out. But the poobah actually got to her first and blamed the whole thing on the baker, and his mouth was sewn shut, his eyebrows were plucked, and he was mummified and buried. At which point the Professor Frith then proceeds to explain that the mummy has since risen and is now on his way to the Bag Farm, which freaks Courage out, but Muriel is merely just a little confused as to why. At which point Professor Frith actually pulls out a very ancient picture of the princess and the royal poobah, and it's revealed that that Muriel and Eustace are a spitting image for them. So Courage the mummy is likely coming to enact his revenge because, as Professor Frith explained, he was falsely accused and then was mummified and buried. So it's likely that he's coming for revenge to actually get revenge on the royal poobah and the princess for actually falsely accusing him and locking him up. And that he's actually coming to actually to kind of set the record straight, as it were. So Courage realizing that and then Professor Frith points out that now that he's explained all that he needs a nap, and then he actually passes out because he's badly injured. At which point Courage then proceeds to wonder what he's supposed to do, and also the mummy is actually also while Courage is actually figuring out what to do, the mummy is actually slowly hitchhiking cross country. He actually picks up a car and rides it there. Then he gets on a military truck for a bit. He takes a plane, but eventually gets annoyed with with the couple sitting next to him. So he decides to leap out of the plane, and then finally he's picked up by Landy and taken the rest of the way. So I am just going to explain that sequence first because that's actually going to be important. But while the mummy is doing all of that, Courage actually wonders if he can actually figure out how to actually appease the mummy. And while the computer doesn't initially understand because Courage misspelled mummy, the computer then goes on to explain how if the mummy is after them because of their past lives, that maybe hypnotherapy will actually work and actually draw out the past memories so that Courage can act on them and try to figure out a way to actually appease the mummy. So Courage does exactly that. He actually retrieves his yo-yo, which if you remember is stored under the couch. And he proceeds to actually dress up Muriel and Eustace as the royal poobah and the princess respectively, and then decides to actually show off some hypnotherapy to actually get the two of them to actually kind of play along and actually recreate the scenario where the royal poobah was actually accused the mummy of stealing the cookies. So, and Eustace is initially very reluctant to actually do this, pointing out that he can't be hypnotized, but it quickly becomes apparent that he can, and Courage actually manages to unwittingly hypnotize him into a monkey, and eventually undoes the hypnosis, which with Eustace being in denial that he was hypnotized at all. But eventually, Courage does manage to replicate the scene, to get them to actually revisit the past memory and actually get them to replicate the scene of when the royal poobah threw the baker under the bus, as the baker is actually coming into the room. And as the mummy actually comes in the room, he's trying to actually attack Eustace and Muriel, and Courage even pleads with the mummy to actually spare them and holds off the mummy and actually resolves to try and hold off the mummy by actually tying up his ankles and actually tying him to the banister of the stairs while he can actually figure out a way to actually stop him. But eventually Eustace, as the great poobah, eventually does point fingers at the mummy by placing a sign that says "I did it" on his back. And Courage realizes he can actually use this to his advantage by actually rewriting the sign to say "I really did it," stick it on the poobah's back. But Eustace as the poobah is actually completely in denial about the fact that he had anything to do with it, and even points out that the royal servant, who is supposed to be Courage, he points out that the royal servant is likely in cahoots. So Courage has to actually find a way to actually find something pretty incriminating to pin on him. So what he does is, remembering that the poobah was actually very greedy and that was the reason why he was selling the cookies in the first place, he pretends to actually be buying cookies from the bakers, from the royal poobah, who then is caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And with that, Muriel as the royal princess then passes the mummy's crimes onto the royal poobah, which not in actuality, because obviously that's her husband. But she then decides to proceeds to actually pardon the mummy for his past crimes and says that she goofed. So the mummy, satisfied, decides to leave and goes back to his crypt. At which point Courage undoes the hypnosis and they go back to their regular business, with Muriel actually picking up a new recipe from the ordeal, because the ancient Mayan recipe was apparently in her head the whole time, and Courage just kind of drew it out with the hypnosis. So which point they hear a groaning noise, and Muriel is curious as to what that is, and it turns out they all forgot Professor Thrift was still in the house. So Professor Frith recovers, saying that he enjoyed his nap, and then wonders if he missed anything, and Muriel merely explains that he just missed the mummy coming along, and that they actually resolved the issue with the mummy. But she merely remarks that the mummy wasn't such a bad dude. He did smell a little bit, with Eustace confirming that he did indeed stink really, really bad. But Muriel points out that was likely his wrappings that was actually causing the smell. So she decided that instead of letting him carry around those old tattered rags, she would actually give him a blanket to actually curl himself up in, as thank you for sparing her, and as kind of retribution for him trying to attack Muriel and Eustace. And also for retribution for what happened in their past lives. But upon hearing the fact that Muriel gave away a blanket, he then starts panicking a little bit and wonders what blanket she gave it away. And she describes it as a red one with polka dots, which is indeed Eustace's blanket. So he actually bolts up right from the table and actually runs off to go confront the mummy and get his blanket back. And the episode ends with the mummy actually still having the blanket and Eustace being propped up in a corner wrapped in mummy gauze. So I think we know how that fight turned out. But in any case, yeah, this episode is just interesting in that Courage actually managed to change history by helping Muriel and Eustace relive past lives and then exposing the truth in front of the mummy. So yeah, that is actually kind of interesting. That's the main premise of this episode. Just Courage using hypnosis, which he apparently knows how to do, to kind of make Eustace and Muriel relive their past lives, and then using that to his advantage, he actually managed to appease the antagonist of the episode by making it so that he was never punished to begin with, and the mummy is now completely satisfied, and they're all best friends. So it worked out for the best, except for Eustace, who is now wrapped up in a corner. But that's beside the point. But in any case, yeah, that was a pretty interesting episode. Onward to the next one. Okay, so this episode, Invisible Muriel, is kind of straightforward. So the episode starts off with Courage finding a strange stone in the middle of what is later revealed to be restricted space. And a satellite actually picks up on this and actually notices that he's actually stolen the stone from where it was buried and has actually brought it back to the house. At which point it then cuts to the kitchen where Eustace is swiping something from the stove. And that something is later revealed to be a special blue ribbon dog food that Muriel is actually creating. And Muriel explains how she hasn't made dinner yet and that it actually is dog food. And when Eustace discovers that he ate dog food, he actually becomes disgusted and tries to clean his tongue. But she remarks that with her new recipe, she's more than likely to actually succeed at getting a blue ribbon for sure, which is why she calls it blue ribbon dog food. But in any case, Courage then walks in and presents the stone to her as a gift. And Muriel is happy to receive it and actually goes to to kind of turn it into a necklace using a piece of string and asks it how it's look. Courage likes how the stone looks on her, but Eustace just kind of remarks that it's kind of ugly. So they then proceed to actually sit down for lunch or dinner or one of the two. But in any case, they just sit down to eat. And Courage actually and it quickly becomes apparent that the stone is actually kind of dangerous because, as it turns out, it's turning Muriel invisible. She walks out wearing the stone, and she's partially see-through. And Courage kind of freaks out and actually washes his eyes as some kind of comedy humor. But as some cartoon physics, he takes his eyes out to wash them, and realizing he's not hallucinating, realizes that the stone is actually turning her invisible. But he actually has no idea what's actually going on. But as the day progresses, she actually becomes, as the night actually goes forward, she actually becomes even more invisible. And by the next morning, she's completely invisible. Meanwhile, the government is now completely aware that the house is that somebody has taken the stone and is now in the process of and that somebody is most likely wearing it. And the government actually orders its best agents to actually go in and retrieve the person who's invisible as well as the stone. So some agents actually go and do that. We actually meet them in a bit. But in any case, the next morning, Muriel is actually eating breakfast. Courage realizes there is a problem. Realizing that she's actually turned completely invisible. So Courage actually calls Dr. Vindaloo in a rare sense of incompetence. Dr. Vindaloo is actually able to successfully diagnose what's going on with Muriel. As Courage actually explains to Dr. Vindaloo, Dr. Vindaloo hears the situation and realizes that most likely the simplest solution is to actually remove the stone. So Courage plucks the stone from around her neck, only for it to be revealed that didn't actually work at all. So he gets back on the phone with Dr. Vindaloo, who points out that he'll actually need to run some tests and actually asks Courage to actually bring him the stone so he can actually conduct some experiments, and then also a band-aid because he actually was shaving his legs at the time and actually accidentally hurt himself while he was talking to Courage. So Courage goes to actually go get Muriel, but it's at this point where some government agents actually barge in, and they actually abduct Muriel to actually run some experiments on her and retrieve her so that they can get the stone and her as far as possible, so that they can actually run some government tests. And with one of the agents telling Courage not to worry, that they'll bring her back as soon as they figure out how to actually undo the invisibility. So they then proceed to actually go in with that. They then proceed to go off and leave. And Courage, realizing he now needs to actually figure out where Muriel is, he actually calls up he actually brings Eustace to Dr. Vindaloo's office, and actually tells him what's going on. And Dr. Vindaloo actually decides to actually run a twofold plan. He's going to have Eustace wear the stone, since by Dr. Vindaloo's own admission, that stone for whatever reason doesn't work on dogs. And while Courage actually sniffs out where Muriel is. So Courage actually leaves with her shoe, which he managed to pry off of her while she was being abducted, and starts sniffing around looking for her, trying to follow her scent and eventually find her. Meanwhile, Dr. Vindaloo runs some tests on Eustace once he turns invisible. First and foremost, he actually uses a lobster to try and run an experiment, which winds up being a no-show. He then proceeds to start slap Eustace around with a whale, which works temporarily. Eustace does turn back every time he's slapped, but he winds up turning invisible again anyway. So at which point, Dr. Vindaloo decides that they are actually in need of a lunch break and actually start eating sandwiches, but it becomes apparent that Eustace is actually eating one made of dog food, and becomes disgusted and spits it out, and then turns visible again. At which point, Dr. Vindaloo realizes that he's actually discovered that the antidote was Muriel's dog food the whole time. Meanwhile, Courage does eventually find out where the government agents are actually holding Muriel, and also there's a really funny thing where Muriel thinks they're actually trying to get the recipe for her dog food out of her, and also put in actually they're trying to figure out where she hid the stone, because she didn't have the stone on her, because Courage snatched it before they picked her up. So she eventually admits that she puts vinegar in all of her recipes in hopes that the government agents are happy. But as it turns out, where they actually took her is across the hall from Dr. Vindaloo's office. So, and Courage then proceeds to explain to Dr. Vindaloo that she was across the hall the whole time. So Dr. Vindaloo is a little kind of gets a goofy look across his face, pointing out that he never noticed that was there, and finds that's a little bit funny. But now that they know where Muriel is, and now that they know what the antidote is, he then decides to actually kind of go on a stealth mission to actually go and to successfully save Muriel. So he has Eustace actually turn invisible again, but this time without clothes, and then Courage will hide under his hat with the dog food, and the plan is to actually go and find where Muriel is actually being held, and then proceed to splash the dog food on her so that she returns back to normal. And that is the plan, but Eustace gets sidetracked when he finds out that there's actually a top secret gold storage, and decides to pursue that instead, much to Courage's chagrin, since they're supposed to be saving Muriel, but Eustace just kind of shrugs him off. And eventually Courage just gets out from under Eustace's hat and leaves, while Eustace goes to go play with his gold. At which point Courage is actually cornered by the government agents again, who recognize him and try to figure out where he's hiding the stone. So they proceed to pursue him around the building and through Dr. Vindaloo's office, and in a display of incompetence, the government agents don't actually notice that Dr. Vindaloo is actually holding the stone. They just keep pursuing Courage. But eventually they manage to chase Courage back into their secret government facility, where Courage actually splashes dog food on Muriel, and she turns visible again. At which point the government agents come by, noticing that and realizing that, and where Courage actually hides underneath Muriel's apron. And the government agents, realizing that they don't know where Courage went, and Muriel is no longer invisible, they realize they have nothing nothing to show for it, and actually escort her out of the room. And with that they actually go back home, and and Muriel actually proceeds to perfect the recipe so they can go and win first prize at the dog food competition. Meanwhile, the person in charge of the government operation decides that now that the stone has been lost, they have nothing better to do, so they actually switch to their plan B mode of attack, which is to actually actually make the statues out of gold. And as it turns out, the storage room where Eustace found all the secret gold is actually a statue making facility, and he winds up getting turned into a gold statue as Muriel wins first prize. And the episode ends with Courage bearing the stone, and Muriel winning first prize, and her remarking that sometimes you do get exactly what you're supposed to be given. Case in point, Eustace is then unveiled as a gold statue, and he comments to himself that if only his mom could see him now. So, and also Eustace gains boxers because censorship. Obviously they can't have a naked old man on a gold and turned into a gold statue, so they gave him boxers inexplicably. So just to get around the censorship and all that, but which is funny. But in any case, yeah, this episode is actually pretty straightforward. Muriel is abducted for being turned invisible, and then Courage and Dr. Vindaloo work together to actually figure out how to turn Muriel back, using Eustace as a guinea pig. So yeah, it is a kind of a pretty funny and pretty straightforward episode. But yeah, especially the gag where Courage goes on this big cross-country trip to actually go and find Muriel and the secret government facility, and it turns out it's just across the hall from where Courage started. So it is just a really hilarious scene. But in any case, that's my review of Courage the Cowardly Dog. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. If you want to help support the show, it's only a couple bucks a month, and it does really help me out. So I would definitely appreciate it if you guys did that, help support me, especially since this is a very big project, and I would like, and if you guys want to see more of these, then by all means, check out the link down in the description. And also, be sure to check out my Twitch down in the description below as well. I am streaming I stream every Sunday, but specifically I'm streaming horror games to go along with Courage Month. So if you want to see those, by all means, link is down in the description yet again. Go check that out, and also help me fulfill a milestone. I need 50 of you guys to actually go down there and follow me so that I can actually fulfill a milestone. So be sure to go check that out. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. And also, they may or may not be Courage related, but you already knew that. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!